bless you. I'm not having a good hair day today, guys, so please ignore. Where are you gonna sit, bud? Good choice. Hello my friends, welcome back. I think a couple months ago now, I filmed like my favorite romances of 2023 so far. And I think I specifically did my top 10. And in that video, I said I'm also gonna film a fantasy version of this. And now I am finally getting around to filming that video. So today we're gonna be talking about the best fantasy books that I have read this year so far. So like my top recommendations. Obviously, this is very subjective, but for me personally, these are my favorites. I was looking over my reading journal whilst I was preparing to film this video so I could like see all the books that I've read this year, and I have read just under 70 fantasy books so far this year. Romance and fantasy are definitely like my two main genres that I tend to read, but out of the almost 70 fantasy books I've read this year, I think I have between like 10 and 15 recommendations for you guys, but I'm really excited to talk about all of these. In my romance video, I did like rank them like 10 to 1, 1 being the best. I'm not doing that in this video because I honestly like don't really know, but I'll tell you like my absolute favorites and the ones that I like rated 5 stars and things like that. So let's just jump straight into it. Starting off, I definitely have to mention the first 2 Crescent City books. I read these in January this year and they were so good. I read aatar and Throne of Glass last year and then Crescent City at the beginning of this year. I do highly recommend starting with aatar. Like if you haven't read any books by Sarah J Maas, I definitely recommend starting with aatar, then reading Throne of Glass, and then reading Crescent City. There is like a reason why, but these are the only Sarah J Maas books that I've read this year, so they're the only 2 that I can mention. I did reread aatar earlier this year and I'm in the middle of my Throne of Glass reread, and honestly I hope I can reread these 2 as well before the next one comes out in January. But these ones are so good and they're very different from the other series that Sarah J Maas has written. So these ones are urban fantasy. They are much more modern. In these books we are following Bryce, and honestly she's kind of trying to figure out a mystery. Something happened to some of her friends and she is just trying to figure out why and how and everything that went along with those things. It's a lot more complicated than she originally anticipated, but it's so interesting following her along, meeting all of the characters that are introduced in these books. I do think these series are a little bit more complicated, like they just feel very layered, like there's a lot going on and it takes you a second to really like click and understand what's going on, but once you do click, it is so worth it. And when I say they're like urban fantasy, more modern, I mean that in the sense that this is set in like a city and the people who live there have like cars and guns and things like that, which you often don't see in fantasy books. I wouldn't say this series is probably one that I would recommend to people who haven't read any fantasy before. Like I wouldn't say it's very beginner friendly, but it is really good. Really, really good. Also at the beginning of this year, I read The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare and these were absolutely phenomenal. I think my rating was something like 4.5. They were definitely all around 5 stars to me. The last one is my favorite. If you've read this series, you get it. This series is so freaking good. I know that the like reading order for Cassandra Clare's books can be a little bit complicated to understand. I will try and link a video down below that I watched that explained things really well. If you want to read all of Cassandra Clare's books, I would recommend starting with The Mortal Instruments, which is another series by her. But if you don't want to read all of them, I feel like The Infernal Devices and The Last Hours, which I will talk about in a second, are the 2 that I would like really recommend. They're my 2 favorite series. I honestly might talk about them both at the same time because they're both absolutely phenomenal and they're set in the same world. This is the Last Hour series. This is the Infernal Devices series. They are both set in the Shadowhunters universe. Basically all of the books in the Shadowhunters world follow the same like magic system and deal with the same like kind of creatures and things like that. Shadowhunters are demon hunters and all of these books are urban fantasy, so it's set in like our world but it has a fantasy element to it. Some people have magic, some people don't. The mundanes, which are the humans, don't really know that magic exists and they can't see it. It's honestly a really cool magic system. I love this series, I love this world, but The Infernal Devices specifically follows a few characters back in the Victorian era in London, and then the Last Hours series is set almost around the same time and it follows the children of the main characters in The Infernal Devices. So that's why I think if you're only going to read some of Cassandra Clare's books, definitely start with Infernal Devices and then move on to these. This world is so complicated and once you like really dive in, you're really in deep, so it's kind of hard to explain, but it is YA and it's just like a lot of fun, a lot of adventure, really good romance. Best love triangle I've like ever read about in my life is in The Infernal Devices. Like literally shattered my heart and then put it back together again, like so good. I love these series. I love the Shadowhunters world with like my whole heart. I'm obsessed with it, so I obviously had to include them in this video. I think I'll talk about some more series that I have read. One that is a little bit more recent to me is the Secret Shanghai series by Chloe Gong. So it is made up of 4 books, but again, you don't need to read all of these. If you want to read this series, you would start with These Violent Delights, and then you would read Our Violent Ends, and these are a duology. They are a Romeo and Juliet retelling, and they follow Roma and Juliet, 2 characters who are from opposing families in Shanghai in the 1920s, and both of their families are very prominent and powerful in Shanghai. And in these books, Roma and Juliet end up having to work together to save the city, I guess. And obviously there is a romance, and this romance is absolutely phenomenal. I think I do enjoy romances that have that like historical element to them, because the way the characters like talk to each other is just like so romantic and so like wholesome and beautiful, and I'm obsessed. I think this one was like 4 stars and this one was like 4.25. And of course you can just read these 2 books and stop there. You don't have to continue, but if you do want to continue being in this world, which I definitely did after I finished with those 2 books, you then move on to Foul Lady Fortune, which is a bit of a spin-off series. And in this book we follow Rosalind, and Rosalind is a family member of one of the original like main characters in the original duology. So you follow her as she goes on quite an adventure. There are some things that happen to her specifically in the original duology that lead her down a specific kind of path, and she kind of ends up being a bit of a spy. She has a code name, and in this book we also have a romance. There is a marriage of convenience. It is just like full of like secret identities and code names and like secret missions, and it's just so entertaining. I really enjoyed this. I think this was also a 4.25 star read for me. And then if you would like to, you can read this little novella. It's really short. It's called Last Violent Call, and in this book we follow characters that have been present in the Secret Shanghai series so far, and I can't believe how impactful this little novella was. Like the things that happen in these stories are so interesting. Like my jaw literally dropped at certain parts of this little novella, which I just feel like that never happens in a novella, but I feel like these were so good. And I think the whole point of this novella was to kind of prepare you for the final book in the series, which has now come out. I haven't read it yet. I want to read it really soon, but it's called Foul Heart Huntsman, and again it's going to continue Rosalind's story, but it's also going to really incorporate the original duology as well. So I'm so excited to read the final installment, and I just think it's such a fascinating world, and I think Chloe Gong has done an amazing job writing the characters and the storylines and everything. Like it's so good. Another series that I also read very recently, so I won't talk too much about it, is the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. I don't know if there's a different name for it. Let me know if there is. The first book is Once Upon a Broken Heart, and the second book is The Ballad of Never After. Right now these are the only 2 books out, but the 3rd book comes out so soon, like literally in a couple weeks, and I am so extremely excited because the 2nd book definitely ends on a cliffhanger, to say the least. Like this book caused me pain with the way that it ended, so I'm really excited to get the 3rd book later this month and complete this trilogy. But I feel like the best way to describe these books is very like fairy tale-esque. It reminds me a lot of Alice in Wonderland. The writing is very like flowery and lyrical. There is an amazing romance, mostly in the 2nd book, not so much in the 1st book. It just feels so magical and so special, and I love it so much. I honestly think this is in one of my like top 5 recommendations. Like if you haven't read this series, I cannot recommend it enough. It is so good. I personally haven't read the Caraval trilogy. I know some people say that you should before you read these 2. I didn't. I still found that this made complete sense to me, and I didn't feel like I needed to or like I missed out or anything like that. So love these books. He's fallen asleep. He just looks like a little fur ball right now because he's all curled up. I think we're on a bit of a roll with the series, so I'm just going to continue. Another one that I enjoyed a lot but isn't like a 5-star series to me, but I would still really highly recommend, is the Scholman series. I think that's what it's called. This is a trilogy by Naomi Novik. I think this is YA and it's dark academia. It's set at a school, and this school, I feel like every time I mention one of these books I have to put the map of the school on the screen because I don't know, I feel like it's one of the best maps that I've ever seen, and the fact that someone just like created this in their brain is so fascinating to me. I wish I could explain it to you guys, but I feel like it just would take a lot of time and I probably wouldn't explain it very well. But the school kind of resembles a screw, and every year the school kind of screws further into the ground, and when you're in freshman year you're at the top of the school, and every year you get lower to the ground, and in senior year you have to go through kind of like this competition slash like trials slash life-threatening course to escape the school. And you escaping the school is you graduating. It's really, really interesting. But we're kind of just following our main character as she goes through school and as she prepares to graduate and all of the things that she goes to in order to prepare for graduation. I feel like I can never explain this the way I want to because I feel like reading it is so much better than any explanation I can give. But it was just really fascinating and unique to me. Another book that is technically part of the series, even though I haven't personally read all of the books, is Renegades. And this is also technically sci-fi, so I'm really just kind of like making this fit in this video, but I just really wanted to talk about it. This book is 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. It is YA sci-fi technically, and it is all about superheroes. In this world, some people have powers, some people don't, and the people who do have powers are called prodigies. And if you are a prodigy, you can try out to be part of the Renegades, which is kind of like, this is kind of a bad explanation, but it's kind of like the police force of this world, kind of like the government. They're just kind of like the good guys, the people that make sure society is running well and deal with anything that is going wrong. But there are some people in this world who don't want to be part of the Renegades but still have powers, and they have created their own little like gangs and things like that. And there is one girl who is a part of one of these gangs who basically decides, hey, I don't like this and I don't like the power that the Renegades have and I want to do something about it. And so we're following that girl's POV, and we're also following another POV, which is a guy who is part of the Renegades. And so we're kind of seeing these two conflicting POVs, and as their plot lines kind of come together, it's so fun. There's like secret identities and missions, and it's just like so fast paced and fun. I really, really love this book, and I feel like I just want everyone to read it. And then I have a few books that are technically part of series, but the rest of the series hasn't come out yet. So right now they're kind of standalones, so this is a great time to jump into these series if you get overwhelmed by having a lot of books to read. Like you want to read Throne of Glass, but you're like, oh, there's like 8 books, that's so scary. These are books that you only have 1 to read right now, and then you can like slowly read the series as it comes out. Obviously I had to mention Fourth Wing. I feel like everyone knows about Fourth Wing by now. I feel like I don't even need to recommend it to you guys, but if you just need a good fantasy recommendation, this is just a crowd pleaser. I feel like most people absolutely love this. Obviously not everyone, but most people really enjoy this. I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't 5 stars for me. It was like a 4.25, so like really good, but not necessarily like the best book I've ever read. But I do think it is such a great recommendation. I feel like it's one of those books that everyone should read. It's kind of like Divergent meets Harry Potter meets How to Train Your Dragon. Like it's just so good. Also, this is really fast paced. There's romance in it. There's betrayal. You never know who to trust. There's a lot that goes on in this book, and it's just really, really good. I feel like even though the first book wasn't a 5-star for me, it could end up being a 5-star series as it continues. Like I feel like there's a lot of potential with this series, so I'm excited to see how it continues, and the next book is coming out so soon. So if you haven't read this book yet, I definitely recommend. This book I think is going to be one of my favorites of the year. It was so good. This was a 5-star read for me. This is Divine Rivals. This is going to be a duology, I think, but the second book isn't out yet. It comes out at the end of this year. But this is a beautiful historical fantasy. There's political intrigue. There is an amazing, amazing romance. In this book, we are following Iris and Roman, and they both work at their local newspaper, and they are rivals. They're kind of competing for the same position. But in this world, there is a war going on, and Iris's brother has gone to fight in the war. And so she decides to write him letters. However, the letters don't end up going to her brother. They end up going to someone else. And that person starts writing back. So there's this like magical letter situation going on, which is so cute. But honestly, I feel like the writing and the romance in this book is truly beautiful, like beautiful, and I can't get over it. I heavily annotated this book, like underlined so many things, put so many tabs in. Like I am just obsessed, and I cannot wait to see what the next book is like, because it ended just so... like I just need to know what's gonna happen. I absolutely love this book. I know it's not for everyone. I've heard a lot of people say that it was too slow for them, too boring for them, but for me, it was literally perfect. Another one that's definitely on the slower side, but again, I found just absolutely perfect, is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. This is another one that I think is gonna be a duology. The next book comes out, I think, early next year, and this is a cozy fantasy. So that just basically means there's no high stakes. It's not like life and death. They're not like fighting wars and doing crazy things. Like it's very cozy. And in this book, we're following Emily Wilde, who is a scholar, and she is trying to write an encyclopedia of fairies. And so she has traveled to a certain place in the world where she hasn't been before to do the last little bit of research that she needs to finish her encyclopedia. So she goes there, she's doing that. You're just following her along as she does her field research, and as she interacts with like the townsfolk and stuff like that. It's so cute. And then her academic rival ends up showing up, and it's just like so cute to read about, because he just pushes all of her buttons and she gets so annoyed. I know this is not for everyone, but for me, it was just perfect. Like the perfect vibes, so chill, so fun, little adventures in fairyland. Like, are you kidding? It's so good. I can't wait for the next book. And then we also have Powerless by Lauren Roberts. I loved this book. This was another 5-star read for me. I think this is perfect for fans of Fourth Wing because it gave me a very similar vibe, except I honestly think it's even better than Fourth Wing. It doesn't have any dragons, so I'm sorry about that, but it's just really fast paced. The romance is really good. But in this book, we have two POVs, Kai and Payton. Payton is kind of from the slums, and she is also pretending to have a power because in this world, if you don't have a power, you are exiled and killed because they want to have this elite society. So Payton is just pretending like she has a power so she doesn't get exiled, and she ends up somehow being entered into this competition called the Purges. And the Purges is where a bunch of elites get put in a competition together, a bunch of trials, and they just fight until there is one winner. And obviously she doesn't have a power, so that's a really interesting situation for her to be put in. But Kai, who is the other POV that we are following, is part of the royal family, is extremely powerful, just kind of like best of the best, and he is also in this competition. And there's just like a lot of interactions that these two characters have, and the romance is so freaking good. Cannot recommend this book enough. This is again probably in like one of my top 5 recommendations because it's just so fun. The next book comes out in May next year, I think, and I think from what I've heard it's going to be a trilogy, so I'm super intrigued to know how this goes because again, this book definitely ended on a bit of like a cliffhanger, but it was like the perfect cliffhanger in my opinion. Like I was really satisfied with how it ended, and I cannot wait to see how the story continues. So the girlies who don't want to start a brand new series, I have a few standalone recommendations for you guys. So first of all, we have One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. This is another Romeo and Juliet retelling, and this one is set in modern day New York City, so very different vibe to These Violent Delights, which is 1920s Shanghai. So it felt very different from that one, but if I had to compare the two, I like the writing better in this book, but I like the romance better in These Violent Delights. I think both plots are amazing, so honestly read both. But back to this one. Obviously we have two families that both have a lot of power. The Antonovas are like a set of a bunch of sisters, and obviously one of those sisters is like the Juliet, and then there are the Fedorov brothers, and one of those brothers is like the Romeo. And these families have so much history, and it's so interesting reading about the history between the two families and how they've kind of ended up disliking each other and being like against each other. Like I loved knowing like the backstory. Also there's witches. That's kind of like the fantasy element of it, so definitely recommend this one. This was like a 4.25-star read for me. Another standalone which I absolutely loved is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. I feel like a lot of girlies are intimidated by Brandon Sanderson, and I definitely was before I picked this up, but honestly I don't think we have anything to worry about. I decided to start with Warbreaker because this is a standalone, and I didn't want to like start a series if I wasn't gonna like his writing or his world building and things like that. But I rated this like 4.5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was all so good. The world building, the magic system, the plot, it was just so much more fun than I anticipated. I think I want to read the Mistborn trilogy next because a lot of people say either start with this one or with Mistborn. I feel like I'm gonna butcher what this is about as well because it's just kind of like there's a lot of things going on, but I would say mostly we're following two sisters, and one of them gets like sold off to be a wife of a god, and the other sister kind of goes after her to try and like help her out, I guess. That like is not interesting at all. Like I'm sure none of you are like, oh yeah, I want to read that now. I don't even know what else to say to make it sound more interesting to you guys, but I promise you this is like literally so good. I feel like this book had just kind of everything. It had like family dynamics, it had political intrigue, it had a bit of romance to it as well. Like it was just so well done. It was also like funny. I was not expecting it to be funny, but it was. Cannot recommend this one enough. And the last little standalone that I have to mention is To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. This is such a great, like I want to read fantasy, but I don't want to start a new series, and I don't want a book that's like 600 pages because this is kind of short and sweet. Obviously you just get start to finish, a great plot, great romance, really interesting storyline. I feel like it's just like everything you want without being like 600 pages, so I cannot recommend this one enough either. This is a Little Mermaid like reimagining, and in this book we kind of have like an enemies to lovers situation between the princess of the sea and then just like a prince who obviously lives on land. But the princess of the sea is trying to impress her mother, who is obviously queen of the sea, and so she is kind of trying to do all of these things to gain her mother's approval. And the prince doesn't want to be a prince at all. He actually wants to be a pirate. So obviously he is like off on the seas being a pirate, doing pirate things, and somehow they end up interacting, I guess, and the storyline kind of goes from there. And like I said, there's a romance that goes on, but it's obviously very forbidden because they're kind of from opposite worlds. And she's technically not a mermaid, she's a siren, and humans hate sirens and they kind of like hunt them. So it's just like this whole thing. But I really enjoyed this. I feel like it was very different from a lot of other fantasy books that I read because I feel like I read a lot about like fae. And obviously this is like mermaids and pirates. So it was just really different and really fun. And again, short, sweet, standalone. We love to see it. And then lastly, I have some honorable mentions. So books that I wasn't like utterly obsessed with, but I would still definitely recommend. And I don't have like too much to say about them, but if you're just like looking for another recommendation, here are a few that I have. Firstly, we have Belladonna. Some people love it, some people don't. So I hesitate recommending this. I personally really enjoyed it, but this is YA gothic fantasy. Think like Haunted Manor vibes. I feel like it just gives those like dark, eerie, spooky vibes, and there's mystery and there's romance. Next up we have The Bridge Kingdom. I've only read the first 2 books in this series, and I think there are 4 books out right now. I don't know if there are more coming or if it's done, but the first 2 books are around 4 stars for me, so like really enjoyed them. But I'll just read you a little part of the back because I feel like it kind of like sums it up really well. Raised as a warrior, Princess Lara knows 2 things. Prince Aaron of the Bridge Kingdom is her enemy, and she must be the one to bring him to his knees. So basically she is like sent in to the Bridge Kingdom to kind of infiltrate from the inside out. Super fun, enemies to lovers vibe. And then once she kind of gets in there, she's like, oh, I think I've caught feelings. I've caught feelings for the guy I'm supposed to hate. So really, really fun. Definitely recommend this one. Then we have This Woven Kingdom by Tahara Mafi, who is also the author of the Shatter Me series. And I feel like I don't hear a lot of talk about this series. I think it's going to be a trilogy, but only the first 2 books are out right now. And I've read book 1 and book 2 and really enjoyed them. But this is one of those books where, again, in the first like book, you think it's going to go a certain direction, and then I think it's going to end up taking a different direction. Obviously the series hasn't ended yet, so like I can't be sure. I can't say much more than that without ruining anything, but it's just one of those series where you're like, oh, this is so predictable, I know exactly what's going to happen, and then you're like, wait, maybe not. But in the first book we kind of meet a prince and then a servant girl, but the servant girl may or may not be like a hidden princess, hidden queen kind of vibe. So there's like political stuff, there's romance. It's just, I really enjoyed these. Both of them are like 4 stars for me, so I'm really intrigued to see where the storyline goes because I feel like the 3rd book could definitely be my favorite. And then lastly, we have Dance of Thieves and also Vow of Thieves. I think Dance of Thieves is definitely my favorite out of the 2. Like Vow of Thieves kind of fell off a bit for me personally, but they're both pretty fun. This is like the OG enemies to lovers storyline. So if you haven't read this book and you like enemies to lovers, you definitely need to. But I think those are all of the books that I have to talk about in today's video. Hopefully you guys found a new recommendation or 2 that you can now read and hopefully really enjoy. Also, please let me know if you have any recommendations for me. Obviously, I'm always looking for recommendations, but I love you guys so much. I hope you have a great day or night whenever you're watching this, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye.